4:12 a.m., November 7th, 2025. The kind of cold that makes even steel shiver. Above Ukraine, the darkness split open. Streaks of orange light screaming through the night. Russia had unleashed its deadliest wave yet. 45 K-35 cruise missiles and 120 Shahed-type drones tearing across the sky like mechanical locusts. Within minutes, the quiet of Kiev was gone. They called it Operation Winter Strike. Moscow's show of dominance, a billion-dollar message written in fire. But that night, something strange happened. Beneath the frozen streets of Kiev, where power had vanished and fear filled every corner, silence turned into something sharper. Calculation. Because while Russia was lighting up the sky, Ukraine was plotting something that would change modern warfare forever. A strike, not of rage, but of precision. A message worth $4 million, aimed at breaking a defense worth $500 billion. They tried to freeze a nation, but ended up freezing themselves. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you'll see how 30 fighter jets, guided by deception and data, shattered the illusion of Russia's invincibility and rewrote the rules of war. The story begins with a scream, sirens cutting through the darkness, and ends with silence over Moscow. But to understand how it all unfolded, we need to start with the night the sky caught fire. The night began like any other in wartime, tense, cold, uncertain. But at 4:12 a.m., everything changed. Ukraine's radar screens lit up with hundreds of signals all at once. Alarms screamed through underground bunkers and city streets. Mothers carried their children into basements. Soldiers grabbed helmets still warm from sleep. Above them, the storm arrived. 45 cruise missiles, each worth more than a luxury jet, sliced through the air at nearly 900 kilometers per hour. Behind them followed a swarm of 120 Shahed drones, humming like a plague of steel. Their engines rattled windows from Kiev to Dnipro. In less than 10 minutes, the first explosions shattered the night. A 12-story apartment block in the Obolon district collapsed in 19 seconds. 87 residents were buried beneath flaming rubble. A nearby school burned to ashes, only the outlines of desks and half-melted backpacks left behind. Hospitals went dark. At a maternity ward, nurses carried 11 newborns through smoke-filled corridors, the only light coming from their phones. Outside, snowflakes melted in the heat of the fires. By dawn, the damage was staggering. $420 million lost, 38 civilians dead, 9,000 displaced, and nearly half of Kiev's power grid had vanished. Entire neighborhoods turned into silhouettes against the flames. The temperature dropped to -9 degrees Celsius. Families wrapped themselves in blankets and waited by frozen taps for emergency water trucks. Hospitals rationed their last 12 hours of generator fuel. Russia called it Operation Winter Offensive. Ukraine called it the crime in the snow. But beneath Kiev, in the dim light of an underground command center, fury began to take form. Maps flickered on screens. Satellite images showed smoking craters where power stations once stood. And in the middle of it all sat President Volodymyr Zelensky, silent, staring at the data. "If they want to freeze us," he said quietly, "we'll make them feel the cold too." Those words changed everything. That was the moment Operation Spiral Gate was born. A counterstrike not of vengeance, but of precision. Not to destroy cities, but to send a message so sharp it would pierce Moscow's pride. A plan that would gamble 30 aging F-16s against the most expensive air defense network on Earth. But could $4 million worth of aircraft and deception tear through a wall of steel worth $500 billion? We're about to find out. Because as the fires burned over Kiev, engineers and pilots beneath the frozen ground began preparing the trap that would humiliate the Kremlin. Dawn never really came that morning, just a gray blur of smoke over a broken city. Kiev's streets were silent, except for the crackle of burning wires and the slow hum of backup generators fighting to keep hospitals alive. But 18 meters underground, inside the presidential command bunker, something colder than rage was taking shape. Around a long steel table sat Ukraine's top generals, intelligence chiefs, and defense ministers. Their faces were pale from exhaustion, and the dim light flickering off the screens in front of them. Maps painted with red arcs, enemy radar sweeps, and casualty counts climbing by the minute. The damage report was merciless. 45 missiles, 120 drones, over 620 residential buildings damaged, 1.2 million people without electricity, and one line that froze the room. Target, National Energy Grid. Status, 45% destroyed. President Zelensky leaned forward. His voice was calm, almost too calm. "They want to freeze our nation," he said. "Then we'll make them feel the cold too." Silence followed. Not hesitation, calculation. That sentence marked the birth of Operation Spiral Gate, Ukraine's answer to Moscow's winter strike. It wasn't designed for revenge. It was built for psychological impact, to show that the untouchable could bleed. The plan: hit the Kenin nuclear power plant, located 200 miles northwest of Moscow, the pride of Russia's energy network, guarded by a fortress of S-400 missile systems, Pantsir S-1 batteries, and radar shields that cost more than most nations' armies combined. The weapon: 30 F-16 Fighting Falcons, relics by NATO standards, but newly upgraded with AAPG-68 radars capable of locking targets at 180 kilometers, each armed with AIM-120 AMRAAM missiles that could reach Mach 4 and strike with surgical precision. Supporting them, 35 UJ-22 drones, each worth only $100,000. Their mission wasn't to fight, but to die, acting as bait to lure the billion-dollar defenses into firing first. Every officer in the room knew what this meant. They were about to gamble $4 million in hardware against a wall of steel and algorithms worth $500 billion. But what they also knew was this: Russia had spent years building fortresses. Ukraine had spent years learning how to slip between them. That morning, orders were sealed, pilots briefed, encryption keys distributed. And as the last line of code was uploaded into the drone software, one sentence appeared on the mission terminal: "Let them know Moscow is not untouchable." From that point, there was no turning back. The storm that began over Kiev was now heading east, silent, invisible, and far deadlier. Because the true power of Operation Spiral Gate wasn't in its missiles, it was in its deception. They didn't rush, they choreographed. At 03:58 a.m., 30 F-16s sat on a frozen runway, engines ticking like impatient beasts. A single UJ-22 drone lifted first, small, cheap, expendable. Its job was to lie, to sing across enemy radar as if it were a full strike. Within 90 seconds, Russian radars screamed to life. Pantsir and S-400 sites lit up and locked on. Interceptors launched. Millions of dollars in missiles hunting a toy. The sky filled with contrails that looked impressive on scope, but meant nothing on impact. From Kiev's control room, officers watched currency evaporate in real time. A $100,000 drone had just pulled $5 million in interceptors out of the sky. The math was cruel and beautiful. Spend a little, make them spend a lot. The decoys did more than waste missiles. They painted a picture. They drew attention. They created blind spots. Every fired interceptor told the Ukrainians where Russian focus lay. Every wasted salvo thinned the shield. Every false return made the real strike easier to hide. Then came silence. Not victory, a quiet window. The main strike climbed low and fast beneath radar horizons. Pilots hugged the terrain. Their radars went dark to avoid detection. The F-16s were no parade. They were knives in clouds. Behind them, the bait had done its work. Moscow's warriors had exposed themselves. Their best weapons were burning fuel, not defending steel. And in those minutes, the balance shifted. The expensive had revealed itself as predictable. The cheap had rewritten the script. Deception had become the scalpel that would cut through the wall of steel. But what happened when the real storm hit? And how close did the F-16s come to being swallowed by the very defense they outmaneuvered?
4:06 a.m., November 8th. The horizon over western Russia glowed faintly, not from sunrise, but from radar sweeps, missiles, and fire. 30 F-16s broke into formation, slicing through thin layers of cloud like blades through smoke. Below them sprawled Moscow's pride, the Kennan nuclear power complex, defended by one of the most expensive air defense webs ever built. And yet, that web was already frayed. Inside Russian control centers, confusion reigned. Radar operators saw phantoms, systems jammed by their own countermeasures. Every ghost contact looked like an incoming strike. They fired blindly. Each S-400 interceptor cost $2.5 million. Dozens were fired into empty sky. In 10 minutes, $40 million in ammunition vanished, burned by fear. Then the real storm arrived. Flying barely 300 feet above the frozen forests, the F-16s crossed the border at Mach 1.2, invisible until it was too late. At 4:07 a.m., the first missile locks blinked green. Stage 1 complete, the lead pilot whispered. Begin attack. 9 precision bombs dropped almost simultaneously. 3 AIM-120s slammed into the reactor's containment hall, detonating in blinding flashes that tore through reinforced concrete. 5 more ripped through cooling towers, sending shockwaves that collapsed 400 tons of steel. The last missile struck the electrical switchyard. 2.4 gigawatts gone in an instant. Moscow's western districts went dark. For 14 minutes, the capital of Russia was a black silhouette against a burning horizon. Inside the nuclear facility, alarms wailed. Engineers fled under raining debris. Flames climbed 1,000 meters high, visible from miles away. 12 dead, hundreds injured. The cost? $1.2 billion. Gone in less than 15 minutes. But for the Ukrainian pilots, the radio was silent. They didn't cheer. They didn't look back. They simply turned west, throttles full, vanishing into the dawn like ghosts that had already made their point. In Kiev's bunker, a single encrypted message flashed across the screen. Targets neutralized. Moscow's wall is broken. A $4 million strike had just humiliated a defense worth $500 billion, and the world was about to wake up to a new kind of warfare, where size no longer meant safety, and where precision could cripple power. Morning didn't rise over Moscow. It limped. A column of smoke 20 kilometers wide hung above the skyline, thick enough to turn daylight gray. The once buzzing capital was silent. Traffic lights dead, metro tunnels still. Over 2.3 million residents woke up in darkness, not to alarm clocks, but to the acrid scent of ash drifting from the west. Inside the Kremlin's underground command chamber, President Putin listened without speaking. Reports came in fragments: dead, injured, missing. The Kennan nuclear power plant, a national symbol of stability, was now a crater. Screens displayed satellite feeds of molten steel and broken reactors. 30 dead, 477 injured, 1,000 displaced workers. Damage, $1.2 billion. But the financial loss wasn't what stung the most. It was humiliation. The heart of Russia's defense network, the fortress touted as impenetrable, had been undone by 30 aging jets and a handful of decoys. By 9 a.m., the news had escaped censorship. Images of the burning complex flooded global feeds. Telegram channels buzzed. Western analysts called it the precision strike that broke the myth. In Brussels, NATO convened an emergency session. No outrage, no condemnation, only a statement that echoed coldly across the world. Ukraine exercised its right to self-defense. Hours later, Washington announced an additional $800 million in aid, including 250 new drones and advanced jamming modules. The message was clear: keep going. Meanwhile, financial markets panicked. The Russian energy index plunged 11%, wiping out $23 billion in a single day. Investors fled. Currency exchanges froze. And yet, in Kiev, there were no celebrations. Inside the same bunker where Spiral Gate had been born, Zelensky stared at the live feed of Moscow still burning. His words were quiet, almost mournful. This isn't victory. It's a reminder that terror has a cost. He knew what they had done wasn't conquest. It was deterrence, precision warfare in its purest form. A lesson carved into history that fear could be answered with logic and arrogance with accuracy. War analysts called it the dawn of algorithmic warfare. Strategists called it the death of size. Because in a world where billions could fall to millions, everything had changed.
By nightfall on November 8, 2025, the fire over western Moscow had dimmed, but the shock it ignited would burn far longer. The city's skyline stood bruised, its proud towers framed against a red horizon that refused to fade. From the ground, the smell of smoke clung to everything: the streets, the glass, the silence. For the first time in decades, Moscow, the symbol of invincibility, was wounded. No parade, no declaration, just a quiet, embarrassed city nursing a scar too big to hide. Meanwhile, Kiev's lights flickered back on after nearly 40 hours of darkness. Families gathered in stairwells, basements, and shelters. Children held candles like trophies, whispering to each other as if afraid the light might vanish again. In the chaos, something powerful had returned: hope. The same people who'd spent the night under missile fire were now seeing something they thought impossible: that the terror falling from the sky could be answered and punished. Numbers told the story better than speeches ever could. $4 million in ammunition, $1.2 billion in destruction, a $500 billion air defense system exposed, a nation of 140 million left in darkness for nearly 2 days. Economists called it the most cost-effective strike in modern history, but soldiers, pilots, and citizens called it something simpler: balance. In war, balance is rare. One side builds, the other breaks. But that week, the weak became the teacher. The message was heard not just in Moscow, but in every capital watching from afar: that courage, precision, and data could outweigh wealth, power, and fear. At dawn, President Zelensky stood once more before his people. The camera lights flickered, reflecting off his tired face. "They tried to freeze our nation," he said softly. "Instead, they awakened it." The line spread like fire across the world, retweeted